Hi, it's Panda. A quick note before we get into the episode. You stumbled upon one of our early episodes. We're still proud of them, but can understand that the quality isn't up to standards for most people. We hadn't really hit our stride yet, and we were still just getting to know one another. If you find us irritating or unlistenable, maybe start from one of our Dead House Gates episodes. We do get better, we learn to edit better, get better equipment, and just learn how to podcast better as we grow. We appreciate you taking the time to give us a listen. And now, on to the episode.
Now these ashes have grown cold. We open the old book. These oil-stained pages recount the tales of the fallen. A frayed empire, words without warmth. The hearth has ebbed. Its gleam and life's sparks are but memories against dimming eyes. What cast my mind, what hue my thoughts as I open the book of the fallen, and breathe deep the scent of history. Listen then to these words carried on that breath. These tales are the tales of us all. Again, yet again. We are history relived, and that is all. Without end, that is all.
Hello, and welcome to the Legendarium Green Team Malazan series. I'm Huron Fan, and I am joined by fellow Malazan veteran Ashaman.
Hello, everybody.
I am also joined by newcomer Yasna Zaboy.
Hello.
Who has read the first 3 books of Malazan, and finally we have Befuddled Panda.
Hi.
Who is reading Malazan for the first time. Okay, so this is our first episode. Are you guys ready?
Oh, I'm so stoked.
I'm nervous, but I'm ready.
Yeah, I'm nervous as well, but
this is our first episode, so we're still kind of figuring out the kinks. And so if you have any criticism or helpful advice, let us know on the Discord. Today, we are going to cover the first 7 chapters of Gardens of the Moon. Our plan for the series is to read chapters 1 through 7 for the first episode, that's this one, discuss those chapters, read chapters 8 through 16 and discuss those chapters, and finally, read the rest of the book and do a full book discussion. After each section, Ashaman and I will be recording a series spoiler discussion and will release that at the same time as the final episode. During the final episode, we will review the book, but until then, it's just discussion. All right, so shall we do the prologue first?
Yeah,
sounds good to me.
All right, so the prologue, setting the scene. Ganos Perrin, a merchant son, is in Malaz City, and the city is burning, and he meets an old grizzled vet, and the old grizzled vet said, "Don't be a soldier." And he meets the Empress, and that's it. So, what did you guys think of the prologue?
It's a very good way to set the tone for the series, in my opinion, as well as setting up some of the major players, at least in the early books. I really like everybody who's introduced. I like how they are introduced. Shout out to my girl Lazine, who is one of my favorite characters.
Panda, what did you think of the prologue?
So I think it was confusing, yes, because there's no backstory or anything. You're literally just basically walking into a conversation that's happening, and they're talking about different locations and a little bit about the history of what's happening with the emperor. And then all of a sudden there's another character that's introduced. But I thought it was actually really cool because once you get into the first chapter, you start to connect some of the dots a little bit. And I will just leave it at that because I think there's a lot more to be said for the chapters that follow.
Yasna, what'd you think?
I really liked it. I liked. I didn't appreciate it so much when I first read it 7 years ago because I was coming straight out of Wheel of Time, and I thought that I was being introduced to my fish out of water main character with Ganoes, and then when that turned out not to be the case, and that's not how the story is at all. I was very confused, but now that I know what to expect going back through it, I really enjoyed it, and I like the conversations between Perrin and the commander and Surly.
I'm not. The prologue for me is fine. I think it serves what it wants to do. And it introduces our main characters, but other than that, I think that's fine. Shall we go on to chapter 1?
Okay, yeah. It's pretty short. Yeah.
Chapter 1.
Just a point of clarification. we're just spoiling everything, right? There's no non-spoiler part to this episode.
For chapters 1 through 8, yes. No, all spoilers.
1 through 7. Okay,
1 through 7, yeah. 1 until 8.
got it.
All right, so chapter 1, there's a fisher girl, and she talks to an old lady, and the old lady yells at her, and the old lady dies, and then Amanus and Cotillion come, and then a lot of stuff happens. How did you guys? It ends with Perrin meeting his sister and going to the capital and meeting the Empress. So, what did you guys think? Ash, you want to start?
Yeah. Again, this is this sets up the rest of the book in introducing and developing our characters. Perrin is older. He has refused the commander's advice to not become a soldier. He has used his noble connections to become a lieutenant at a very young age. I like this again. I'm just going to say I like all the chapters. I should stop saying I like it. But you get a good introduction of Ericsson's humor as well. There are some quite funny scenes, in my opinion, especially when Perrin exits the Imperial Warren right into the throne room, and the Empress is just kind of sitting there, and she's like, "Hey, what's up?" And he's like, "Oh, hey, what's up, Lazine? Long time no see." But yeah, it sets up both the darkness and the humor of the series quite well, in my opinion.
Why does the Imperial Warren open into the throne room?
It's an excellent question. Who knows?
That just
Where
makes
else is it
no
going to open?
sense.
You know, it's just you can just
Maybe-
have people popping in right where she's having an audience at any time.
How about the stables? The stables seem nice. I mean, you could put his, whatever.
Like right outside the front door. I don't know. It is very odd. But I wonder.
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. I was gonna say I wonder if it's because it's the Imperial Warren, so it's very what's it called? Surveyed, and it's also not like just anybody could take it. So it's almost like you're an expected guest if you're coming through there. So I don't know.
It could be it. I think that maybe they just had no other choice because it seems like a terrible place for a door. So Panda, what were your impressions of the first chapter?
So a lot has happened, and it's you have a full-on massacre that you just basically read and it happens. You may not. Well, as I was reading it, I didn't quite understand that it was a massacre until a little later in the chapter. And then there's just the mystery that occurs. One thing that I noticed is when a character is introduced, it's not usually by their name, right? It's not like, and this is so and so, and this is what they do, and blah blah blah, right? Like it's very much the character comes, something happens, and then you get little bits and pieces of detail, and then you'll get a name sometimes. Not always, but sometimes you'll get the name in that same section. Yeah, usually at the end. So I can see why people say it's confusing if you're used to more linear storytelling. But for me, it was fun. It's like little puzzles throughout the chapter to try to piece together the details. And then I would ask you guys in the DMs, like, hey, did I get this right? So, yeah.
You got most of it right. Yeah, well, it's more fun than crawling through lots of blood and guts and bones and stuff, right? It's very visceral.
Yeah, it's a very organic way of introducing characters, in my opinion. You really get the sense that the world isn't catering to you, the reader. It is just there, and you get to be an observer, which is something I really like in the series. You see it in the world building, you see it in the characterization, you see it everywhere. It's something Erickson firmly believes, that the reader shouldn't be, as he says, spoon-fed.
Yasna, what'd you think?
Of chapter 1?
Yes.
Or okay. I really liked the conversation between like Riga and
Fisher girl.
sorry, the Fisher girl, I guess, because she's not sorry
Yeah.
yet. Between those two, I like that. Like, and I didn't realize the first time I read this because on audio it's so hard to follow a lot of this stuff, and I think I listened to that chapter.
We're going to be
on
saying
audio.
that a lot, right? I didn't realize this the first time.
But it's very clear, and like you don't need any extra information from later on to read it, that before Amanas, that's his name, right? And and Cotillion show up, the that Riga is in the Fisher Girl, because there's like this one little paragraph where they establish, or maybe it's two paragraphs where they establish it, where like she says something in the old lady voice, and then like she's kind of confused about it, and she says the Fisher Girl says something, and then it flips back, I think, twice before Amanas shows up. So and so it like very right there is like, oh, she's possessed by the spirit of this old lady, and it's established so quickly that you blink and you miss it, and then
it's easy to miss.
Yeah.
I think Sari spits too, which the Riga was doing a lot. Like once she's possessed, she spits, and you're like, oh well, that's the tell.
Yeah, and she also says prod and pull. Just a quick shout out. I love the idea of an assassin named Sori. It's just so good.
So I want to talk a little bit about Amanas and Cotillion. So they're introduced, and I was amazed at how clear their voices were. Just with they were only in the chapter for a few pages, but at least for me, who's read before, it's absolutely clear, even without him telling us whose names is who, which character is which, just based on how they speak. And I really like that. But how inept are they? Am I right?
Yeah, their plan immediately gets found out.
Yeah, we need to kill everybody here so they don't know what we're doing. And then Ganos and Lauren come and they're like, oh yeah, so I think gods are involved and they're trying to steal these two people. It's just like one after the other. I don't know if that's supposed to be humorous, but I think it's pretty funny.
I think it's just a commentary on how adept Lauren is at her job. She's just so good at what she does.
Yeah, she's very capable.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Topper. Did Topper make any impression on any of you?
Yeah, he didn't so much when I first read the series, but now that they've gone through it once, it's funny to see him beginning like this. He tries to be all friendly and stuff to Perron, and he just kind of gets stonewalled, and he starts being just kind of a bit surly about it, like a petulant child. It's interesting to see Topper like this.
I really like the introduction between Topper and Ganos. But if that's it, do we have anything else to say before we move into chapter 2?
I think with the first few chapters in particular, when the reader is getting introduced to a whole host of characters, right? I think some people might feel a bit overwhelmed when they're reading it because it's just one after another and you're not quite sure how much attention you're supposed to be paying, what details you should keep track of. And what I would say is that just be okay with needing to go back and reread sections. And I think that's something that, Ash, you definitely mentioned previously. And I did find myself going back to just like, so this detail here, after reading a few chapters later, like coming back, is that what this means? And it's very satisfying when, as a reader, you're able to put those dots together.
Yeah, because you're like, oh, I think I read this part before. Also, by the way, anyone who's reading and who wants to do that easily, there's a web page on the internet called Search of the Fallen. You could just type what novel you want to search and what chapter and up to that point, so you don't get anything you haven't already read. So like if you want to search for Acronis, you just type in Acronis and it tells you all the places where it's located. It's really helpful.
Okay. I did not know that.
Sorry, I should have told you that before. It's very helpful.
Okay.
I've used it a lot. Oh yeah, one more thing I want to say about this chapter. So much happens.
Yeah.
So I gave a really quick synopsis at the beginning, but I've been writing summaries for each chapter, and it took 372 pages to write it concisely, in my opinion, to show everything that happened. And that's going to be pretty common in this book.
Wait, your
372
summary?
words, you mean, right?
Yeah. Okay. I was like, your summary is 327 pages.
Oh, sorry, I said pages. Sorry, 372 words. It's a brief summary. All right, so chapter 2. Chapter 2, this is where all the big explosions happen. So we're introduced to Tattersail, there's a big battle, and then we get a flashback to before the battle, and we meet the bridge burners and Hairlock gets turned into a puppet.
Yep.
So what'd you think? Yasuna, you want to start first?
Yeah, so one thing that's interesting about this chapter is it's like one of the only times where the storytelling is not, and I think it's the only time in this, at least the part of the book that we've read so far, if not the whole book, where the storytelling is not chronological. And you like start at the end, and then you start getting these flashbacks from Tattersail to everything that happened. And I was just curious why you guys think he chose to tell this story out of order instead, and not the rest. None of the rest of it's told that way.
I've never considered it. That's an excellent. I don't know. What do you think?
Dramatic effect. I think he wanted to do something very specific with this chapter, and he actually has an excellent essay on exactly writing this scene in particular on his website, I believe. And yeah, it was, in my opinion, a very deliberate choice to show the desolation of war as the very first thing you see when you see war in this series. It's not glorious. It's not anything to be looking. You don't look forward to it. You just see the aftermath first and what it has cost everybody. And Erickson really wants us to keep that in mind as we go through the series, what exactly war looks like and is.
I think there's also something really powerful in that, Kalot, Tattersail's lover.
You just call him
Kalot.
he dies, so you can just call him Tattersail's lover.
Well, so like he's gonna die, right? Like that's what you get at the first part of the chapter, and then you reading about the backstory of him and Tattersail, and it just makes it, I think, at least for me, more powerful because you're like, oh, I'm getting attached to this character. I'm getting to know this character, but I know that this character is gonna die. So it's a bit of a stylistic choice, but I think it's an effective one.
It's a good, I don't know, mystery puller too. You're like, hey, this happens, but how does it happen?
Right. Yeah, actually not a lot of, but some thrillers, they do that, right? They start with so and so dies, and then the whole book is about how it happens. And those, I think, when done well, are really, really good reads.
So, how about Ash? What did you think of chapter 2?
I love the Battle of Pale so much. It's probably my favorite event that happens in this book. There's just, and it's one of the more memorable moments in the series for me. It's just so interesting to me how many layers goes into what goes on here. And we start in chapter 2, we start peeling back a few of those layers. We get the raw story of what happened from someone's point of view, but it's incomplete, and we're left wondering what exactly happened here, even though we just witnessed it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of one of the central questions of this book, at least, is like, what exactly happened? Why did things happen the way they did? And for me, it's just so fun and an interesting puzzle trying to figure out what happened along with the characters.
Panda, what do you think?
I think some of the things that you start to see in chapter 2 is Erickson's use of which POV he shows you. And I think to Ash's point, like, we don't get a complete story because we really only see things from Tattersail's point of view. And that adds the mystery. And I think also she, for me, is a bit more likable and relatable as a character. So I really like that we get her point of view from this and not somebody else. Like, if we got Hairlock's point of view for all of it, I don't think I would like it as much.
I like Tattersail a lot more than Ganos.
Yeah.
She's such an interesting character. Just like she's been alive for 200 years. We find out she's a deeply scarred and traumatized mage who is surprisingly really powerful as well, which speaks to the kind of people that are populating this world. They're not infallible as they seem. They're not, and nothing is as calculated as they would like to be. These are all deeply emotional and damaged people. And the older you get, the more damaged you become.
The
I'm
more you
surprised
witness.
I'm surprised at how caring she is, despite her power and despite the people around her being, I mean, Tayshrin is not shown in a favorable light, at least from Tattersail's eyes. Hairlock is crazy. The others die, like so many people die in this.
Mhm.
So yeah, I love Pale. I think in any other book, this would probably be like the end of the story, or like the gigantic battle happens, and I think it's such a great opening. I love we get introduced to the bridge burners, who spoilers, bridge burners are pretty important, and most of them are dead, which is I think pretty bold.
That hit me hard. Like,
Really?
even though we haven't really gotten to know them, right? And most of them are just numbers. It's like 14,000. It was some ridiculous number of how many there were, and then only 30, 35 were left at the end of the battle. Like, for me personally, I am not. I have a fear of being crushed to death or buried alive, and so just like me, like imagining what that death would have been like, and especially when they were they people were told not to go rescue them, so they didn't
Yeah,
even have that hope.
You really get the sense of betrayal that
Yeah,
comes from it. Yeah.
right. So that part really hit me, even though I don't even know the names and backstories of all of those bridge burners,
Apparently they had some because they Erickson said that they were real characters that you just decided to kill off.
Oh.
I like Whiskey Jack's. It says a lot about Whiskey Jack with the way he responds to it. At least the way that Whiskey Jack's feeling at the time. And someone says, "I'm sure they were good men's the one you lost." And he said, "Good at dying."
Oh my god, I didn't even catch that on like the fourth time through.
Yeah. And at the end of the chapter, so Hairlock's puppet, and we get our first deck of dragons reading. So, what did you think of the deck of dragons? Let's start with Panda.
So I think the deck is a very clever device, a very clever writing device. And part of this is, I guess I should preface that I'm reading this, yes, for the story, yes, for, finding out what happens, but I'm also really appreciative of the writing, the intention, and the deck. Like, it is confusing because you don't know what it's meant for. You don't know what these cards that are being drawn, like what they mean, how you're supposed to read them. All you're getting is what Tattersail is telling you. And it was very confusing, but trusted I trusted the author and the process. And so I was just like, I don't understand what this is, but I trust that things will make sense later. So that was my approach.
Yasna?
Yeah, it was really cool, and for the little slice of Malazan that I've read so far, this reading and the ones that we get in this first book are my favorite so far of like the first three books. And I don't know, I like it as a storytelling device. There's a lot of tension in Tattersail's reading, and on rereads you can see like a lot of, if not all of, what each card means. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to say it's a good way to add foreshadowing.
100%. I love prophecies in books, and because I think usually it's a great device by the author to change expectations. It's like, well, this is going to happen, but the wording is always, kind of opaque, right? And you're like, well, how is it going to happen? Ash, what did you think the first time you saw the deck of dragons?
First time I saw the deck of dragons, I immediately was like, this is an excellent, as you say, an excellent way to do foreshadowing. There is so much I love about the deck of dragons. It's a puzzle. It's It sets up major players in the book that you're supposed to be watching out for. And at the same time, it doesn't quote unquote spoil things the way that prophecies sometimes have the tendency to do, because it's not really foretelling anything. It's just setting up who is here, kind of what their alignments are, stuff like that. And it's also just very fun, as you guys have said, to go back later and be like, oh, this is what that meant. And, line all the pieces up and see, oh my God, it's a beautiful tapestry. Well done, Erickson.
Yeah, the Deck of Dragons readings are some of my favorite scenes in the series, and there's some really cool ones later. All right, so just for reference, the two cards that Tattersall picked up on our first reading were the Knight of Dark. Any guesses to who that is?
Perrin,
Okay.
maybe?
And the second card was Opon, which I believe is the first time that Opon is mentioned.
Yes.
All right, so
The
shall we go on to
twins.
the twins, Gestures of Chance?
Is Opon the name of the card, or just the name of the god that happens to match that card in this reading?
I don't know.
Opon is the name of the twins of luck, basically. So it's both the name of the card and of the gods.
They're a pair.
Yeah.
Usually it's part of a house, though, right?
The twins are, I believe, some of the unaligned cards. One of the unaligned cards. So they're not part of a house. They're just a random god, I think.
Yeah, so there are still parts of the Deck of Dragons that I do not understand, like especially the unaligned cards.
Mhm.
If you go to the aligned card, you're like, okay, well, this is this and this and this and this and this. But when you get to the unaligned cards, I'm just like, I have no idea what this means. All right, so chapter 3. What happens in chapter 3? So Topper visits Ganos in a boat. Tattersall talks to Bellardan, who is grieving Nightchill, and she puts a spell on his bag. The bridge burners try to convince Whiskey Jack that the Lysine is trying to kill them. There's another Deck of Dragons reading. And finally, Perrin gets knifed in the back and dies. So let's start. Dies in quotes. Ash, what did you think of chapter 3?
Chapter 3. This chapter is less flashy and exciting than chapters 1 and 2, but it still serves its purpose. It's basically moving characters around, getting them where they need to be for the main plot of the book to actually start. So, first time reading through, I was very surprised that Perrin was just killed like that. Although, of course, he comes back, right? But it's still, he arrives and then immediately dies, which is it's good preparation for the rest of the series. Things can happen very quickly after pages and pages of characters talking about what might happen and what they're going to do. I think it's again good setup for the rest of the book, although not necessarily the most exciting chapter in and of itself.
Did anyone else think that was kind of funny?
Which part?
The part where Perrin gets killed.
Yeah, he shows up. It's like everyone's like, "Oh, it'd kind of be a shame if this one dies because he seems sort of a decent guy," and then immediately just
no. They were taking bets on to when he was going to get killed.
That
because
too.
so many
That is
officers
true.
and the bridge burners were getting killed, and they're like, "Well, everyone's going to think you're going to die here," and then he literally dies like I don't know a few pages after they were talking about it, and I just thought that was really unexpected.
Thought the bets were funny. Not to say betting on when a man is going to die is funny. It's more of the way that it was executed, the dialogue. But I didn't find his death itself funny. I was like, oh, so this is how it's going to happen. And I guess part of it is, were you expecting it to be the people that did end up killing him? Did you expect him to die in chapter 3?
No.
I wasn't expecting him to actually die in chapter 3. I thought it was one of those things where, you keep saying like, oh, he's gonna die, but he doesn't actually.
Which is, I
So
think what most books would do, right?
I think so. And so it was a bit of a surprise that it does happen. I was like, wait, am I reading this correctly? Is he actually dying right now? But then I also wasn't necessarily expecting it to be not one of the soldiers that killed him.
Any thoughts from chapter 3, Asta?
Well, having read this after for the first time, having read this scene after Wheel of Time, I never believed that he was dead in this scene because nobody ever dies unless there's balefire or brain matter in Wheel of Time. So I was just like, no, he's fine. This is gonna work out. But what else happened in chapter 3? The second reading of the deck was better than the first one, right? Didn't she
That
go
was
farther?
Taisharon made
Yeah,
her do the reading.
Yeah, the first one was with Hairlock, right? And she like stopped pretty
Mhm.
quickly. And
Yeah, he's like, I want to see more, and she stopped. She's like, yeah, I'm gonna tease
No.
you.
yeah, and she was pretty satisfied that she had to stop, or supposedly had to stop, whatever.
Yeah, the second reading, the cards were Orb, Virgin of High House Death, Assassin of High House Shadow, Opon, and the Crown. Sorry, go ahead.
And I don't know if I know what those cards are besides Opon.
I don't either.
Exactly.
I had some ideas, but
Yeah. What else happened in this chapter besides Perrin dying? He met all the bridge burners and they were gambling. I mean, I thought like a lot of the opening scenes with like some of the bridge burners we hadn't met before were kind of funny and interesting.
How he meets Picker and then Hedge. Okay, so one of my favorite scenes so far in this reading one of my favorite scenes so far is how he meets the bridge burners, how Perrin meets the bridge burners, because as I've told you guys that I really enjoy the camaraderie that happens both in the Black Company and in here, and it's the humor that's there, the banter that occurs it's one of my favorite things, to read.
I like the characters a lot in the Bridge Burners, even the smaller ones. So everybody, I won't say anything else.
Did we get the scene with was the scene with Whiskey Jack, Dewjack, and Fiddler on the rooftop in this chapter?
Fiddler on the Roof, I think, is another chapter.
Now
Okay.
that you said that, Fiddler on the Roof, was that intentional of him?
Maybe,
Of
I don't know.
Erickson?
I can't imagine
Oh
it
my
not being.
goodness. Yeah. Well, okay, I'm just going to interject here. Basically, everything that Erickson puts in front of me, I'm just like questioning it left and right. Like, is it as straightforward as I think it is, or is there a double meaning, or is it something else? Like the death of Perrin, I was surprised, but I was also like, he's a very important character, I think. So I don't think he's going to be dead, and there are gods involved. So I think something's going to happen. But yeah, anyway.
That the Fiddler on the Roof happens in the next chapter. So I want to talk about in this chapter the continuation of the storyline of the imperial politics. So the Bridgeburners are pissed because they think Lassine's after them, and then Tattersail thinks that Tatian killed all the other mages. And what did you think of this storyline?
It's like an onion, man. It has so many layers to it. I love the imperial politics, especially the stuff that is happening off screen, of which
There's
there
so much
is.
happening off screen, yeah.
Yeah, of which there's a lot. So you have to really work to put the pieces together for this kind of stuff. And I just want to draw attention to a small bit of characterization that Erickson does for Sorry, the Fisher Girl. So the card of the Virgin of a High House Death, that is Sorry. And when she flips the card, Tattersail remarks that the cloth around her eyes is wet because she's presumably been crying. I just think that's an excellent way Erickson uses to just a little bit there to tug at our heartstrings for this poor possessed girl.
So is the deck treating Sorry as a separate entity from Cotillion right now then? Because isn't Cotillion of High House Shadow?
Cotillion is of High House Shadow.
I think that might be a spoiler past the first part, past chapters 1 and 7.
Well, is it? Because don't Cotillion and Amanus kind of do that in the first chapter, or no?
It's not explicitly said what
Oh.
happened until chapter 9.
Oof.
Oh, that they possess her?
That who possesses her.
I see. Okay.
Tyrion says he's gonna do it. I mean, I guess it's technically not explicit, but like,
I think it's fair.
Okay.
yeah. Sorry, sorry, haha. If I
Too-
like went over that
chapters
line,
early.
but since we've already said it, I am curious. Are you saying then, Ash, that the deck has a card for both two different entities that are in the same body right now?
It's the deck is tricky. Yeah. So the version of High Host Death is an interesting. Okay, I can't say. Sorry, that I'm gonna tread on the side of safety here. But basically, things are never really clear cut when it comes to the deck of dragons.
I believe that.
Yeah,
And
there are no
obviously
really
someone
firm
could be part of
dividing
two
lines.
different houses.
Ash is
yeah,
saying, keep reading.
Sorry is definitely the Virgin of High House Death, and Cotillion is the High House Shadow. We will say that.
Mhm.
All right, so
Interesting.
chapter 4. Tattersall meets with Whiskey Jack, Quickben, and Callum and Fiddler. Perrin is at Hood's gate. We meet Hood's servant, and the gods of Ulpon make a little deal with him, and he comes back, and the deal is someone close to him will die. Shadowthrone comes to finish the job, but Perrin, says, "Hey, you don't have to kill me. Don't kill me." And Shadowthrone says, "Okay." And then Ansi finds the body. There's rain. They get Perrin inside the compound. Fiddler on the roof with Whiskey Jack and Dewjack. They talk about their plan to overtake Darujistan. And finally, the Hounds of Shadow are following after Hairlock, and they follow him into Tattersail's room, where I think they are dispatched by an unconscious. Right? Does that happen?
Basically, Tattersail gets overwhelmed by the Hound. Hairlock comes in and tries to capture it for his own purposes, and they think Perron stabs it.
Yeah, Perron's basically out, but then his sword sort of acts on its own.
He wakes up.
Kinda.
Yeah, it's just
It's
the
like
right time.
in
He's
shadow,
kind of in like
or
a
in
fugue
the
state.
sword.
Yeah.
Also, I want to say that at the end of chapter 3, Amana says that someone has entered his warren. Did you guys catch that and figure that it was a Tattersail?
I thought it was Hairlock.
Oh, that's what I meant. Hairlock.
I thought it was Hairlock too.
It's not Tattersail. Absolutely not Tattersail. I just misspoke. So, what'd you think of chapter 4, Ash?
Chapter 4. So this introduces another big part of the series. So the Hounds of Shadow thus far have just been unstoppable killing machines. And then Perron wakes up and dispatches one almost accidentally with his sword, which, to be fair, it's not quite a normal sword, but it's an important theme of the series that mortals, while frail, are also they're not helpless. They can be rather dangerous. I also really like the scene with the twins and the mysterious figure at Hood's gate. They bargain for Perron's life. You got kind of a tragic setup where someone close to Perron is going to die and you don't know who. It's just kind of like laid up there.
Can I speculate?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I mean, we were introduced briefly, very briefly, to Perron's sister, and then we also find out he has another sister and a brother, I believe.
No brother.
just
There's
two
no
sisters.
brother. Oh,
Yeah.
just two sisters. Okay, so I made up the brother. And there's one sister who really likes him, like maybe looks up to him. I think her name is Fen something. Fellison. So I speculate it's her, but I have no basis really other than gut.
You'll have to read and find out.
Yes.
Just concluding, I also really like the Perron really surprises me here with his political acumen when he talks to Shadowthrone, because he's an instant from being killed again. which would just suck. But he manages to basically convince him that he is more valuable to Shadow Throne alive than dead, which, it again, like the wheelings and dealings of this world are complicated, but also no one has any idea what's going on basically, and everyone's trying to figure out, and it's just like a big pile of mess, and I love it.
Big pile of tangled strings.
Yes.
Which thread are you gonna pull?
I was most interested my first time through it, figuring out the what happened with the imperial politics and why is there so much backstabbing. But I won't say anything more than that. Panda, what'd you think of chapter 4?
So the part where Perrin wakes up and he's in like this other world, basically. And he's like
Hood's Gate.
outside. Yeah, he's outside of the gate of death, I guess. First of all,
Hood,
the
god of death.
imagery. Sorry?
Yes.
Yeah.
The god of death is Hood, and so yeah, he's at Hood's Gate.
Hood's Gate. So first of all, the description of that gate is creepy as yes. And the introduction, the very first time we actually see Opon, how do you Opon?
I say
Opon.
upon.
Opon. That's probably a better pronunciation. That was very interesting, and I mean the jokes that they were making. Part of it is my mind was probably in the gutter. They were talking about his sword, but you could totally take it as other. Anyway.
I think that was intentional.
Okay, good. So it's not just me.
I picked up on it too.
And just seeing the interaction between the brother and the sister, and it just reminded me more of like Greek myths, maybe a bit of Shakespearean influence there, and yeah, I really enjoyed that.
So Hood, like I said, is the god of death. Some of the best curses in the Malazan universe will involve Hood, so you'll say keep an eye out. Yes,
Hood's breath.
Hood's breath.
That comes up a lot.
So I'm gonna have to reread that now and look for the dirty jokes that Panda noticed, because
there's really just one.
I know that this. I know that with this first book, Erickson was trying to set up all the fantasy tropes and subvert them, and big swords on fantasy covers as references to phalluses are a big trope in fantasy. So I kind of want to go back and see what I can find there that I didn't notice before. But what I did think was funny, because it was surface level, so I didn't have to think about it to figure it out, was the way that Opon subconsciously decided how Hood's servant would look when he came to them, and he was like pissed about it because it was like unimaginative, and he couldn't like laugh because he was like a skeleton or something, so he was just like this dry cackle when he wanted like a full-throated laugh. And I thought that was like just like a nice brilliant bit of humor that was like dry, and that's a pun, but yeah, it was great, and just it made the world feel a lot weirder than it did up to that point. Though the demons we didn't talk about that were just like casually mentioned in the Siege of Pale also made it seem weird, because they were just like, and there's demons, and like we're not going to investigate that at all, which was great. But the Hood's Gate scene is so overwhelming that none of us have really talked about the other stuff that happened in the chapter. And I'm having trouble even thinking of it, even though we talked about it before we started on this Hood's Gate stuff. What else happened here? Oh, the attack of the Hound of Shadow on Tattersail's rooms, and like the Hound like just like demolishing like a bunch of soldiers before it came into Tattersail's room, chasing after Hairlock. Yeah, that was a really cool scene. And you start to really get a sense of like how kind of psychopathic Hairlock is in that scene. And I think that's all I've got for now. I should have been taking notes while you're writing your summary.
Hairlock is a great character, and I love how unhinged he is.
Yep.
I really like this character because you get a feel for how the rest of is it the Second Army?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, you get a feel for how much the Second Army respects their bridge runners, and especially Kalam.
Oh yeah.
I like the dialogue he has. He's like, okay, so some people are coming through. You need to turn the other eye, and you're like, oh, you're Kalam, yeah, I'll do whatever you want. And then those two, you get a little bit of a characterization between those two soldiers, and I was actually really, really relieved. I think they didn't die, right? The people who they switched with died, correct?
I think that is the case.
Yeah, I was a little relieved by that. But so we're about to move to Darajistan. So do we have any other thoughts for the first 4 chapters?
I
Uh,
do have a couple of things, if that's okay. So there is the scene that we keep seeing Fiddler on the Roof, but we don't really talk about it. So there is one piece that Whiskey Jack, basically, it's his internal monologue. He says, whatever was happening thousands of leagues away was being played out here. Such was empire, and it always would be, no matter the place or the people. They were all instruments blind to the hands shaping them. And to me, that's like, it was a very powerful moment, because whether you want to talk about real world or in the past or whatever, that those are very powerful things to think about, how people far away making decisions and the people that are actually feeling the effects of those decisions, right? Like they seem so powerless. And if they don't do what they're told, right, they may not live. Anyway, yes, Kieran?
I think that's the largest theme of this book.
Mm,
It's a theme in the series in general, but it's people finding agency in a system where their agency is taken away from them.
mm-hmm.
And like through almost every single character, you see what options they are given and what they can do. And for example, sorry, she's literally taken over. She has no
Right.
agency. The Fisher Girl, I should say. Ganos, at the beginning of the story, he wants to become a soldier, but because he did that, he's just a puppet of the Empire. He becomes so he originally was going to have a cushy job somewhere, but he meets Lauren and she changes that. Uh, I won't say anything about Lauren, but even characters later on in the book, they are just gears in the Empire, and that's Whiskey Jack is always thinking about that. And so they're pawns of the gods, and they're pawns of the Empire, and they're pawns of the choices that other people make.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Erickson wants to explore, when you're in that situation, what can you do?
Not to take this down a philosophical notch, but since we're talking about the Fiddler on the Roof scene, I liked Whiskey Jack's conversation with Fiddler about how they both used to work with stone, and Whiskey Jack became a soldier and Fiddler became an engineer, which implies that one of them, and I don't think I've had any official confirmation on this from anywhere past this point, so this is pure speculation. One of them might, because sappers use explosives, so that kills a lot of people, and Whiskey Jack's like commanded armies of an imperial force, traditional militarism and traditional warfare that doesn't have to do with engineering, because he like throws his sword down in the puddle and Whiskey Jack complains about it, and he's like, I never use it anyway and I hate the thing and I'll get it in a minute. And then as soon as Jack gets up on the roof, he's like, is that your sword in a puddle? And like, it's like, so it kind of like draws out like quite a bit about the characters with like a very small amount of ado,
Mm-hmm.
He fits a lot in a small amount of words.
Yeah.
I will just say this to your first point. Erickson does very few things by accident here. Like, he is a very deliberate writer. I won't say whether you're right or not as to your assumptions, but it's definitely deliberate that he put those two things very close together.
Right. I mean, I figured, but
Erickson works a lot with juxtaposition, especially scene by scene. Almost every scene he writes will have something linked with the previous and the next scene. Sorry, Panda?
I was just saying that, well, I was more thinking that, well, thank you, Yesna, for helping me make the connection, because I totally missed that.
Still leaves two options, though, even if I'm right, of which it could be. But
So I got a question for Panda. So in the first 4 chapters, what
Yes.
what races do you remember that have been brought up?
Oh my goodness. Am I taking a quiz? Am I being
No, I want to talk about what you remember. I don't want to bring up anything
Okay.
that might.
Yeah, so There is one particular race that kind of stands out to me. It's the one with wings.
Moranth.
Yeah.
They don't actually have wings, but
Oh.
their mounts have wings. The Quarrel.
Okay. So the coral. Yeah. So
Mm.
the coral are the things that they ride on and that fly, and then the
Yeah.
Morants are the ones that ride them and drive them, I guess.
And wear bug armor.
Yeah, they would chitinous armor. Chitness. I don't know how to pronounce
Chitinous.
it. Chitinous, I see.
Chitinous.
Yeah.
To me, they were. I don't know. In my mind, if it seemed to me that they were a bit bug-like, but I have
They are.
no. Okay, cool. So those are the two that I remember that are not human,
Okay.
other than like the gods and the hounds and whatever.
I was hoping you bring up the Moranth because they're the big ones. The first 4 chapter. I like the Moranth.
Okay.
I'll just let's go into Durgistan.
There's at least 4 others in the first 4 chapters, though.
There are.
All he says, I like them, and that's it. Next.
We could talk about the other ones if you want.
No.
Do another chapter. All right. So chapter 5 starts with Krupp, our boy Krupp. He's in a dream sequence, and a really weird dream sequence. I think those are even just as difficult to parse as the Deck of Dragons readings. And then we find an assassin, and it splits between the assassin and our Durgistan protagonist, I guess you could say, Crocus. Crocus breaks into a very beautiful maiden's room and steals her stuff, and an assassin gets offed by 3 other assassins. And there's a bit of a sequence. Our boy Crocus picks up a coin, and there was a pretty humorous scene going on there. And then he gets to an inn. So let's start with Krupp. So Krupp is our first character. I know our boy Yasna loves Krupp. So what'd you think of Krupp, Yasna?
Oh, Kruppa. I know it's Krupp, but I say Kruppa. I'm sorry. Kruppa is my favorite character. I love him. I love how long-winded he is, how he's like so full of himself. He brags about his adventures, and he kind of like makes himself out to be this like total idiot. But if we, accept his own inner monologue, I believe it's in this dream sequence, but if not, it's in something I reread for the pod. He like thinks he like is smart enough and powerful enough to like mess with the gods. He claims to be able to divine the future without the Deck of Dragons, which is, as soon as you said the dream sequences are hard to parse as the deck readings, I was like, well, they kind of are deck readings. If he's not full of about being sorry, you have to bleep that. If he's not full of it about being able to divine the future without a deck reading, then anything that he thinks about the future or anything that he like experiences in these dreams can be read as the same as readings from the Deck of Dragons. And yeah, this first sequence is really cool. I like how when he is done feeding his the aspects of his self or whatever they are, moldy cheese that he tells them to be grateful for, and bread, he then goes outside and points to Humility, who's like hanging from a tree, and is like, "You have no place in my life." I love it. It's so great. This character is amazing. He's obviously the comic relief of the book, this first book. I mean, there's comedy elsewhere, but him and Opon definitely serve as the comic relief, I think, for the book as a whole, and more so him than Opon. So, yeah.
Ash.
Yeah, I just want to read that little bit. The final aspect of Krupp to complete the dreams array of those faces facing him, which are Krupp's own. Or so you proclaim, your humility. But as everyone knows, humility has no place in Krupp's life. Remember that. So here you will stay. I just love that. That was so funny. Yeah. He like, I love how it's set up where he just passes the figure without a glance on his first time. You're like, oh, who's that? What's going on? And he comes back to it.
It's a body hanging in a tree, right?
Yeah, It's just a body hanging in a tree that he pays no mind to.
That's wrapped. You don't even see the face.
Nope.
So what'd you think of Krupp in the dream sequence specifically, Panda?
So I was kind of suspicious about it because I was like, I mean, it says in his dream, but like we established, like everything Erickson puts out there, I'm like, is it really a dream? Or is he like in another realm or whatever? But it just seems like a dream. Anyway, that was just me. I don't know. I guess we'll see. Well, or not. I don't know how much Erickson actually ever tells us in the end. So it was fun to read, and there were definitely parts where you could tell based on how things are written that okay, this is not the real world, right? Even aside from them saying it is a dream, because there's only one character quote character that ever actually interacts with Krupp. And I don't know. The thing about Krupp is I think he is crazy. I think he is crazy. But at the same time, we find out later that his companions, at least one of them, is suspicious that Krupp is always putting on a face. There is something deeper underneath, but we don't know what that is. All we get is this long-winded person who's very silly and always refers to himself in the third person.
All right.
He's not my favorite. He's not my favorite, but I do appreciate the things that he brings to the story.
I love Krupp, and yeah, he's not my favorite either. But I think in Guards of the Moon, he is the most memorable.
Memorable.
Yes. Yes, he is.
I'll go with rememberable. All right. So, did you like the Crocus and Assassin War parts, guys?
Yep. I love the bit with the coin. It's such a fun sequence. Even just reading the first time when like you don't know what's going on and stuff. It's just it's always fun to see those sequences where one character is just getting absurdly lucky, and everyone's just confused as to what's actually happening. But I don't like Crocus much, but this is definitely one of his better scenes.
Yeah, it almost felt like a. Oh, go ahead.
Actually, you finish your thought and then I'll go.
Okay. I said it almost like that scene. It feels like you could play it alongside like Benny Hill music, or like maybe a Jackie Chan scene, or Stephen Chow.
Because they're on the roof and it's in the dark and.
No, because like in those kind of scenes, like just there's one character and it seems like everything is either going really, really, really well for them,
Okay,
really,
got
really,
it.
really badly, and these I just always imagine like, or who's the Buster Keaton? Have you ever watched Buster Keaton stuff? No.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, there's a lot of physical comedy going on.
Buster Keaton is a silent era film star who did comedy, and like just that kind of stuff happened. Like he's standing in the right place, and like everything falls just.
Oh,
like,
okay. I know what you're
I
talking
imagine that
about.
kind of thing.
Big Trouble in Little China.
Never seen that one.
It's hilarious. You got to watch it. It's great.
All right. So, does anyone have any other notes about chapter 5?
I had something. Because Yesna, you in our notes you did put a question which was like, are there times when you're reading this when you notice obvious references or nods to like the D&D gameplay?
Yeah, right.
And like if there are characters that stick out which could be playable characters. I feel like for me Crocus is one of those. And we haven't talked about the coin that much, but it's a huge part of all
important.
of this, right?
And the motif, the spinning coin.
Exactly. Which I keep picturing the spinning top from Inception all the time in my head when I read the spinning coin, but anyway, that's beside the point. You know what else spins? Dice. Dice also spin. and
luck is attributed to them, right?
Right. And so I don't know if I'm reaching, but to me it's like is the coin a way for Erickson to kind of bring in the D&D role-playing roots of Malazan?
Right.
Anyway.
And I'm not sure if Crocus was one of their PCs, but I definitely read him as like a straightforward AD&D, like, because it started as AD&D before they went to GURPS with it, right? So I read him as like a straightforward AD&D thief. And in AD&D, if you were playing non-humans, you could be like thief mage, and it leveled up together. That's Kruppa. I think Kruppa was probably one of their characters as well.
Kruppa Kruppa was a character. Crocus is Gardens of the Moon original.
Oh, really?
And sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just also going to point out that the rooftop scene was, I believe, the first scene that we've seen so far that was part of the screenplay that he pitched before he turned it into a novel.
I can imagine. It's very visual.
Mhm.
So I agree, Pat. I think Alpon is a personification. I don't know, whatever. I think it is a representation of the dice mechanic in just the luck factor introduced as a god in the world.
That's cool.
All right.
Just one last little thing before we move on is Erickson has admitted that some scenes or the way they turn out, if a character like narrowly doesn't die and instead does something amazing, that happened in their game sometimes. Like, just real quick. Anyway.
Maybe Cotillion and Ominos thinking their plan is the greatest thing ever, and then Lauren finding it 1 page later was that.
Lauren's perception was very good.
Maybe
Very
she
high
rolled
roll.
she rolled a 20 and they rolled a 19. I don't know.
Which, by the way, I do not know very much about role-playing games. I've only recently, I've only played 2 games right now. I've recently started my first D&D campaign, so I'm very fresh to all of this.
I'm fairly new too. I only started last year with Osh.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
Ash, you're a DM, so you're a pro.
Yeah, I wouldn't call myself a pro, but yeah, you definitely see the workings of role playing games in this series through and through, and it's very fun as an enthusiast of the genre to go through it and see where they had all those fun little D&D stories that you can only get from D&D, and they managed to translate it into this world and this story, and I really appreciate that. It makes a lot of these instances have very fresh feel and fantasy, I think.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so chapter 6.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we meet a great raven, Crone. She's flying, and she goes to Crone School. She goes to Baruch's place. Baruch meets Councilman Orr. I think we meet Circle Breaker too.
Yeah.
And Ralik Nam that's Lady Simtal's, but he doesn't kill Lady Simtal. He kills Councilman Lim. We meet Anomander, Mother Rake, and I think that's everything. So let's start with Crone. What did you guys think of Crone? I know Panda's a fan. What do you think?
I love Crone. So to me, this was probably the most literary scene that I've read so far. In this, chapters 1 through 7, because Crone is interesting. Where it's not a person; it's a giant great raven, and Crone also means old woman. An old woman in like mythology, and even in Shakespeare, tends to mean like wise. A wise person. They tend to have some wisdom, but also ravens have like prophecy and insight attributes. So it's just a lot of like literary play there that I really enjoyed, and her speaking with Baruch, where she says like there are 12 ships, 11 of them are burning, and there's one that's spinning, right? And then Baruch is able to make the association that it's the cities. I think it's the cities that were free. And
it was the 3 cities, and the only one left was Darujistan.
Yeah. So I love Crone. She's also very sassy. I love that.
Yeah, I like her comments that she was giving when she was pretending to be a dog.
Yeah.
She said, "Oh yeah, there's a councilman coming, and there's a demon who sits on his shoulder." And what was the demon?
Ambition.
Ambition. That was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we meet Councilman Turban Orr, and he's immediately not a likable guy. And we also meet Circle Breaker. I love Circle Breaker. Sorry, we're still on Crone. Let's move on to Crone. Ash, Jasta, what do you think about Crone?
I really like Crone. I do like, between the name, the way the audiobook narrator voices her, and her personality. She has like the perfect personality and like character voice for like a harpy. So I find myself like making it's like I keep picturing like a human face on the bird's body. I'm like, no, she's a raven. But other than that, I love her character. She's so snarky. She like brings a lot of like sort of knowledge of the arcane into things and conveys that in like humorous and interesting ways. And yeah, I love her interaction with Baruch in this chapter, and I like a lot of her interactions later on that we can talk about later. But yeah.
Now that you said that, now I can't help but imagine Yubaba from Spirited Away.
Me too.
Ash, any thoughts about Crone?
She's a good character. I like most of the characters in the story. I'm not as infatuated with her as you guys are. I do like her and appreciate the what she brings though. I don't really have much to say. Yeah.
Circle Breaker. How is sorry, Circle Breaker is like my favorite character so far. So what do you guys think? No thoughts? Okay.
Well, I was like waiting to see who was supposed to talk first.
Okay, Yasna, go ahead.
I like Circle Breaker. I like the way he's introduced. There's a lot of mystery to it. I like how he kind of like it is like wondering whether his work for the eel is at odds with like sort of his patriotism for Darujistan. And I don't know. He gives he gives flavor to like the sort of like intrigue of Darujistan, because he seems like he's just this city guard, but he's really a spy. And I don't know. And I also we didn't talk about it in the last chapter, so I'll just say it real quickly. I love Darujistan as a setting, like the contrast between the roof life and the street life, and then like sort of the government on the surface, and then the shadow government. It's pretty early established that it's like the mages that are really governing things, and the city of blue flame with the gas lamps, and it's just a great setting.
I agree. I love Darujistan.
I want to hear why you love Circle Breaker.
Okay, we're going to talk about it later, but I'll just say it now. I love the way that Erickson introduces Circuit Breaker, and using the motif of the Despot's Barbican and the history of the Despot's Barbican juxtaposed. Thank you. Next to Circle Breaker and his patriotism, and him fighting against Turban Orr, who we already set up as the guy who's really the enemy of Darujistan. And I think Circle Breaker is great, and I think he's living in poverty, right? He has nothing going for him, but he has this thing that he's striving for. When he has an ideal that he is working towards, and he's conflicted inside about, like I think Yasna said, is he really doing the right thing? Is the eel really? I really like Circle Breaker. He's my favorite character so far, really.
I think for me, Circle Breaker is very interesting because because he's a spy, right? Like his real identity is unknown to us. Like it's not revealed. Even I think Erickson takes the pains to tell us that even his lodging, there is no indicator of what the identity of this person is, right? And if you think about like in real world spy, or not real world, but if what you see in movies and things like that, like very sterile kind of environments, very sterile personality kind of thing. And the other piece is that he is so dedicated. 6 years guarding that one gate or whatever, right? Like that is dedication. So I do admire him, and I'm very curious to see how this character develops, what role he really plays in all of this. So that's my thought about Circle Breaker, and I can't help but keep wondering what the name Circle Breaker means. Like, what does it refer to? So hopefully we find out.
Slight spoiler for the next chapter, but I also really like the scene where he's written a letter to the eel. He's asking for help because he's like, I think I've been caught, and he decides to rip it up. And so we're talking about agency, or I was talking about agency earlier, and the decisions that almost everything that he makes is because he chose to do it, right? I like him a lot.
I like how sparingly he's used. You don't get a lot of him talking. You don't get a lot of you don't get too much of his inner monologue, but a little more than of him talking. And like it's not like Kruppa or Crocus or Raliknam, or any of these other characters we meet in Darujhistan where you're like really or Baruch, where you're really embedded in their head. You get a real sense of who the character is. Circle Breaker is used in reserve by Erickson, and that like adds to like kind of like the mystery because he keeps coming up. He's clearly an important character, but you get so little of him.
Mhm.
All right.
Ash,
So,
did Ash have any thoughts?
Not much. I actually want to draw attention to a different character. So, Circle Breaker, I think you guys have sung his praises enough for me. I don't really have anything new to add. But I really like the character Relic Nom. He's my favorite of the Darujhistan cast. Just because I like the cold, efficient killer archetype. He's not super deep or anything. It's just I just like him for what he is. You really get he is who he seems to be, and sometimes that's enough for me as in a character. I will say that I do not like the cast of characters in Darujhistan as much as I like the Malazan characters. This chapter for me especially is when things start to take a bit of a dip for my enjoyment, but it's still really good.
I'm the opposite, at least in this book.
Same.
In the later books, I prefer the Malazan characters, but in this book, especially my first time through, these are the characters that I latched onto, and I was really interested in following.
That's interesting. Why? What attracted you to these characters more for both of you, Yessa and Huron?
I liked their motivations, and I liked testing out their motivations more than the stuff in the Empire. And it felt like I said, I feel like they were actually doing things, whereas the characters in the Empire were kind of things were being done to them.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. They're more relatable too. Like, I end up relating to the Malazan characters, but at first, they're all like thinking one thing, saying another. I can only hear the thoughts of one of them at one time. And like the way they interact with each other, they're so on guard with each other, and you don't really like get to know them in that first part, whereas like the Darujhistan characters, like it kind of opens up a lot of who they are right away and gives you things to relate to with the different characters, and also like what's happening, the action of the plot is more apparent. So like you're kind of like, it's a lot simpler to follow Crocus and his chase on the rooftops or follow like, Relic Nom and his doings than it is to like keep track of what the hell's going on at the Siege of Pale. And it's not as like overloady. Darujhistan like kind of like steps back from that, like let's overload you with all of this stuff happening. I don't know.
I agree completely. Yeah, there's fewer things to follow and it's easier.
Gotcha.
I think with sorry, go ahead.
Oh, with Relic Nom, to Ash's point, like when you see him, he's an assassin. Like that's how he's being described. And there is that scene where I don't actually remember if it's exactly in this chapter, but where Murillo is like, "Can you be less obvious?" Except for Relic Nom, his intention was to be as overtly an assassin as possible.
Yeah, because
so I got a chuckle.
That's the next chapter, yeah.
I feel like that. I was just gonna say, I feel like that might be like Erickson making fun of either himself or ICE for playing like the most stereotypical assassin that they could ever play at the table. Like that's kind of what it felt like to me, is like the DM mocking the player who brought like the most stereotypical assassin.
I just realized we haven't talked about Rake.
No.
Oh yeah, he's pretty important.
There's so many characters.
Yeah, so we're first introduced to Rake at Pale, and he is a badass, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like he dispatches everybody, and then we meet him with Baruch, and his entrance is like one of the coolest things I've ever read. So what'd you think of Rake, Panda?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, what'd you think of Rake, Panda?
Me? So I think he's so mysterious, and like one of the first things that we learn about him is that he's immortal, right? Like, and the thing about Rake, I think, is that yes, he's very powerful. Yes, he's there's a lot of like respect and mysticism around him. Like he's a legend, but he's also very caring. Like when he talks about the residents on Moonspawn. It's very difficult to say, actually. And he was saying that like all of his fighting people were off with Kaladin. Sorry, I'm just watching here and sneeze. And like the people that were left were the elderly and children, basically. And he made the decision to pull back and let the Empire have Pale because he needed to save his people.
He's also
And
ruthless, though, right? 'Cause
I
he went
mean,
he went after those wizards pretty.
that is
pretty hard.
true.
Right, but he
that's
went.
Oh, go ahead.
He went after the wizards because they abandoned Pale
Oh,
and
yeah.
left only him defending it, which means that entire battle, aside from the like inter-politics of the Malazans, it was just Anomander Rake, one guy, versus the Second Army, their
Right.
cadre, and on top of their cadre, 3 high mages.
Right.
And it was
More
still
than that,
like,
right?
you know,
Yeah.
oh, 4. Sorry.
Wait, I have a question for Ash.
Yep.
So Ash, in the primer you had said like there's a mountain that shoots lasers. Were you referring to Moonspawn?
I'm not answering that.
I always assumed he was referring to Moonspawn when he said that, but now that you're saying that, I'm like, wait, but it was really Rake that was shooting the lasers, so I don't know.
Well, I don't
Yeah.
know if Rake was. I probably have to reread that scene because I don't actually know what was happening in terms of the action. I knew that things were
It's
falling
very
from.
confusing.
Yeah,
It is.
I knew
I
things
still
were
don't know.
falling.
I've read it 4 times.
Ash.
That's on purpose, I think.
Yeah. So just what happened there. Rake was just basically conjuring magic at the Malazans. But basically, read and find out. And if you, if you're paying, just read and find out, and it'll be good.
I think.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Is it read and find out in this book, or you mean just in the series?
Series.
Okay. Cool.
You learn a little bit more in this book too, but yeah, in the series mostly.
Got it.
Yeah, I guess we give it a short spoiler. Yeah, you don't actually find out what happens at Pale completely in this book.
Okay. I'm okay with that.
Shall we go on to chapter 7?
I just have a few thoughts about Anomander Rake. So he is, to me, first of all, when I read the series at first, I thought he was an edgelord, and to be fair, he is a super edgy character on paper. But yeah, as Panda says, like even in the start, when you know very little about him, he has a lot of compassion, and he has big, deep feelings that he needs to express. He is one of the more interesting characters in this series, in my opinion.
I'm interested that you guys are noticing his compassion. I was more drawn to his ruthlessness because he has a really scary sword, right? Like Baruch
Yes.
is frightened of this thing. Like he
Mhm.
says, "Hey, I want these wizards, and you need to give them to me." And Baruch's like, Are you going to use that sword?" It's like, "I think I'll give you their heads, so they don't have to use that sword." So we don't know what's up with the sword. We just know it's scary, right?
No.
Right.
And Anomander says to him, "You have too much mercy."
Right, but
Mhm.
why does he say that? It's because they abandoned their freaking city and let their city be conquered by the Malazans to try to save
And
their skins.
I'm not
and we
saying they
haven't
deserve it. They don't deserve it.
even talked about what happened after the battle, right? For Pale, where there was an hour of slaughter. That was like the quote unquote reward, I guess, for the Empire soldiers. Like,
That was the Moranth.
oh, the Moranth. That was very difficult to read. Even though you don't get a whole ton of details, like it's not as graphic as probably what George R.R. Martin writes in his books, which I've never read, so I don't know. But I'm making assumptions. Even though you don't get like that much graphic detail, just the way that you get enough so that you can imagine what it's like, what it could have been like, that to me was very powerful.
Yes, Ash.
Yeah. these two things, in my opinion, are great examples of Erikson showing early on the horrors of eye for an eye justice.
Mhm.
So basically, the Moranth did what they did because they had calculated to the exact person how many of their own had died because of Pale,
Mm.
and so they wanted retribution for that. But obviously, that's horrifying. They had an hour of slaughter in the city. That's, as you said, it's tough to read and think
Mhm.
about. And
Spoilers.
Amanda Rake, he's
I don't think we learn that until a later chapter.
that no, we knew that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's mentioned in the when they have a conversation about it.
Apologies.
But yeah, you also have Animander, who is his sword means business, man. And death is, in his opinion, too good for these mere death is too good for these wizards.
Traitors.
Yeah, these traitors.
All
We
right.
should hit
So,
chapter 7.
yeah, well, let's get to chapter 7. We're running out of time. So we got another dream by Krupp. Krupp meets Kerul. We get another scene with Circle Breaker. Lady Simtol talking to Orr. Murillo. Murillo's doing his thing. I like Murillo. Crocus wants to get his stuff back so he can give it back to the beautiful maiden. Yeah, the scene with the scene where Ralik's walking through the streets and Murillo sees him, and then Murillo and Ralik are planning something, and finally it's scene with Baruch. So, chapter 7, final one of book 2. What'd you think, Ashvan?
This is where things start to get good in Darujhistan. There are many balls that are set in motion by Erikson, and you don't get any of the Malazans in this book of Gardens of the Moon. So you kind of left wondering where they fit into all this. But this is an excellent final chapter of setup before the main conflict between the people of Darujhistan and the Malazans starts for the book. I just want to draw the attention to Crocus and his hilariously teenage angst about robbing what's her face, the lady the wonderful Lady Darl. That, like, if you haven't gone through a stage in your life where you thought like Crocus does about things, then I don't know what to tell you, but that was
I envy you.
yeah, he's so cringy and it's so relatable. It's hilarious.
It is, but also, like, a decade, maybe a decade and a half since I've ever thought anything like that. So it's like very removed from relatability as it goes farther back in time. And every time I read the sequence where he's talking about how he violated the Lady Doll because he violated her privacy, and
tantamount to rape.
Yeah, I hate Crocus more every time I read that scene. Like, and I kind of like him in other scenes, like, later on. But this scene is just devastating for me liking Crocus. I don't like it. I'm like, oh God, why?
I mean, he's kind of right, though. I mean, he invaded her privacy in the most intimate part of her life. You saw her naked. I mean, she could. Never mind.
I mean, the way that it was described was very effective, right? Because all her suitors, all these like very high-powered, rich men did not have access to her room, but he did.
Mm.
Yeah. So that was, I think, a very good way of showing what he meant by that he basically assaulted her, because that was her privacy. That was her haven. Yeah.
Yeah, he's not entirely wrong, but it's just so funny how melodramatic he is about it.
He is very melodramatic, yeah.
Absolutely.
17-year-old and
like a lot of teenagers, he sort of gets it, but he also he's thinking about this way in a crazy light, basically.
And all of his best friends who are middle-aged men are like, "Oh, he's smitten."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Why are all his best friends?
Yeah, doesn't he have any friends at his own age? Like,
he's supposed to he would have if he stayed on the path that his father wanted him to go down,
His
right?
uncle.
But he chose or his uncle, but he chose to be a thief.
Yeah.
So
I love his
But
friends.
hopefully it's just
I
a
love.
phase.
Mm.
Oh, sorry.
They just wanted better for him.
hmm
I like Murillo most of the group, actually.
he's a ladies' man.
See, like I usually hate characters like that, and I'm being completely serious. I just don't like womanizers as ladies' men, but I really like Murillo. Especially when Rallick is talking about Murillo, and he's like, "Well, usually he goes after widows because he doesn't like the
Oh
morality
yeah,
of it."
that's true.
And
Is he a womanizer or is he just a hoe?
he's just a hoe. He's not a womanizer.
Yeah.
But he does. I think he uses women, right? But they get something out of it too. So I don't know. He's a very complex character, and I like
It
him.
seems like in most cases, he's respectful towards them,
He is.
even while
And
he's
he's not a
being a
womanizer.
player.
I shouldn't have said that, but he's definitely a player, and he gets around. And he's also a nice guy. I like him a lot.
Yeah, he
All right.
has some sort of moral compass.
I think we should get on to our other questions because we've been talking a long time.
I told
Yep.
you this was going to be hours.
I don't know. Does someone else want to take the lead and talk about something they want to, or shall I just go through the
Sure,
questions?
I can kind of give it a try because I've been kind of working some of this into our existing discussion.
Mm.
But let's get to some of the like listener questions. So Red Army Ian, he asked like, which characters do you find yourself drawn to at the start of the book? I think we kind of answered this already, right? We've got Krupp for some of us, Tattersail.
Shall we just go around and tell which one we've liked so much the most so far?
Yeah.
Yeah, mine was definitely Circle Breaker. Yasna?
What was that? Sorry.
What character do you find yourself most drawn to?
Krupp. Kruppa. Definitely.
Ash?
I'm gonna say the boring answer right here and say Piran.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think it's boring. I think that one's pretty good. I have, Tattersail and Crone. I can't remember. Does Talk the younger?
Talk
He shows up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very briefly.
Very briefly, but I like him.
I like that Tattersail is. I love Tattersail, and she's probably my favorite on the Malazan side. But I loved the first time reading it, especially because I hadn't read a lot of fantasy besides Wheel of Time. I loved that she's thick and she's the romantic female lead, and dudes like her because, like Matt in the Wheel of Time is like a chubby chaser, but it's like always like non-entities. Like it's like the maid or like whatever, and then he marries the skinny chick. So like I was just like, whoa, cool, awesome. There's like, some range here. People aren't all like, supermodels for some reason.
Erickson writes a lot of voluptuous women.
Spoilers for Wheel of Time, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
Which
I didn't think that
not
was
read.
too severe a spoiler, but
It's not a big spoiler. Eridandus,
Oh.
the bridge. I'll go.
Wait. Before we move on, I did want to also give a shout out to Whiskey Jack. He is a pretty complex character, and Dujek. Those two I really enjoy. Anyway.
Okay.
yeah.
Eridandus, the bridge burners are an obvious knockoff of the Black Company. Did that make it easier or harder to read? And if you haven't read the Black Company, there are so many characters. Who should we pay attention to most of the why? So let's start with the bridge burner question. I hadn't read the Black Company before Malazan, so no. There are definitely obvious similarities, but Panda, you just recently read the Black Company. What do you think?
I did. So upon you and Ash's recommendation to read Black Company before starting Malazan, I did. I only read the first book though, so I can see the parallels. I think mostly it's just the camaraderie that comes with having gone through such terrible things together. You have respect, you watch out for each other, you're like family. One of my favorite tropes is found family, so I personally really enjoy these aspects. But I think for Erickson, he actually I think writes these characters in more depth, because partially I think part of the reason is because in the Black Company you only get one person's point of view, whereas here we get many points of view. It's omniscient. We get many characters' thoughts. So I think for me, I prefer Malazan.
And I would say rather than knockoff, inspired by the Black Company. There's a lot of, at least from the first 2 books of the Black Company and the first 2.5 books of Malazan, maybe there's a difference. Maybe if I finish Black Company and finish Malazan, I'll have a different opinion. But from first 2.5, first 2, they are, the naming conventions are obvious. Like, it's obviously copied. Like, they don't use their real names in the Bridge Burners or in the Malazan armies. They make up a name when they enlist, and like, themes of camaraderie, and they're like frontline soldiers, and it's fantasy for the frontline soldiers. Those things are all true, but the Black Company are a bunch of mercenaries, and the Malazans are Imperial soldiers, and the morality of that and the types of characters that you get are very different. Like Quickben is a very different character from like Goblin in One Eye. So I'd say it takes inspiration from, not like a knockoff or a ripoff. But anyway,
I agree.
I think knowing Aerodandus, he chose knockoff very intentionally. So don't think about it too much.
Yeah, he's definitely trying to provoke us here.
But also,
right?
but also to really answer his question, like, did that make it easier or harder to read? I mean, I think it probably did make it easier for me subconsciously, but it's not like that big of an impact, I think, for me.
As far as to who to keep an eye on, I think everybody that we spoke about in depth earlier covers that, right?
Yeah, I think we've answered that.
I like Nom, Aurelia, Crocus, Perrin, Tattersail, etc. All right, so Lady Sweden says, question for a newbie, so really just Panda, right? Was the beginning of Gardens of the Mood what you expected? Was it easier or more difficult to read than what you expected? And did it help to read the Black Company first, similarities and differences in style?
Yeah, so no, the beginning of Gardens of the Moon was not what I was expecting. So I knew going in that I was going to be thrown into action, but I didn't know exactly what to expect. And I think it is easier to read than I expected because the pacing is really good, and the sentences are very readable. Now, I specifically chose these words. Sentences are readable. What is difficult is keeping track and understanding all the clues and the details that are given within each of those sentences, and pulling the puzzle pieces together. And I think it did help in that I read The Black Company first, because The Black Company was way less exciting. But structure-wise, it was similar. And themes-wise, I think there's some similarity that can be drawn, at least from the first third that I've read of Gardens. And we've already talked about the camaraderie. I'm also a person who loves the show MASH, so I don't know if this helps listeners get a better sense of like what I like, but that's what I like. The difference in style is that Erickson provides more details, and he writes a more complicated plot, in my opinion, at least compared to the first book of The Black Company. I haven't read the rest, so I don't know. There's more depth and substance to Gardens, and I also mentioned that because we get omniscient point of view in Gardens, it's just more rich. It's a richer reading experience than The Black Company.
Ash, did you have your hand up?
Yes. I just want to make one small point. I think The Black Company did an excellent thing in introducing the type of soldier camaraderie into the genre that you hadn't really seen before. And I think that Erickson does it, but better. That's my hot take of the episode, everybody.
I agree with you.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. Other question by Lady Sweden. What was the coolest part of chapters 1 through 7? She wants to know what we think. So I would go with the attack on Pale.
Yeah, 100% agreed. It's so cool.
Same.
Devastating but epic.
Everyone?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Everyone agrees
yeah.
to Pale? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We've kind of already gone through Yasta's prompts. So Ash asked, what initial opinions do you have of Malazan Empire and major players within? What pros and cons of the Empire do you see right now? I think I've already gone and talked about what I feel about what the Empire does to its people, and especially the soldiers, and how they kind of just become pawns of the Empire itself. And even even the higher players, they feel like they're backed into corners. I
Hmm.
don't think that the empire is evil or good. I just think it's an empire, and empire's empire. Empires will empire. Um,
I my thought here is that this question is quite tough for me to answer. And it is also earlier on in the book, so I'm not quite
yeah,
sure
okay.
yet. Hmm?
It's just hard to make that after 4 chapters with the Malazans.
Yeah. But there was a specific part that stood out to me, and this is Ganos doing his like internal monologue, and he asked himself like, was the Empire the Empress, or was it something else? A legacy, an ambition, a vision at the far end of peace and wealth for all, or was it a beast that could not cease devouring? And I think those are excellent questions that Erickson probably really wants his readers to just examine and think about, like, what are your thoughts? What are your take on what an empire is?
Right.
Yeah, I don't think this first book really shows us any good examples of the pros rather than the cons of the empire. This book kind of casts the empire, even though you identify with with imperial citizens and soldiers at various points through this book. This book kind of casts the empire in an antagonistic light, which, like, I feel like as the series goes on, there's more like give and take, and pros and cons can be like identified more easily. Like we don't see in this book what the empire looks like at home too much, and like how it benefits its citizens. We just see like the first time we see citizens of the empire in imperial territory, they're being slaughtered by Hounds of Shadow, and then we see them making war to conquer on Genebacus, but we don't see like what a Genebacus controlled by the empire would look like. So there's no room to answer this question in this first book, at least from these first 7 chapters.
I mostly agree, and I think so. Yeah, the empire does not look good right now, and which is hard to do because a lot of the characters that we're following are pawns of the empire, and they work for the empire. And so I think initially I was put off by that. I'm like, why would I want to follow these characters? They're doing these terrible things, or they're working for this terrible machine. But I like these guys. I want them to succeed, but at the same time, what they're doing is not really great, right? And I think that's on purpose, and I think that's really applicable to modern day politics.
Yeah, so all this is excellent thoughts, and why I did the prompt in the first place is not so much to get people's definitive opinions, and none of you have given a definitive opinion on the Empire as of yet. It's just I'm probably going to be asking this question throughout the series because for me, I think it's the central level 2 question of the series is what does the Empire mean? What is it worth it? Is it worth all this death and suffering that it causes? And what are your general thoughts on it? And that is a question that I asked myself many times throughout my first read through. And after every book, my opinion on the Empire was different, and it had evolved in some way.
Right. Yeah,
Nice.
I was thinking this question, like I have more answers to this question, but I can't answer them from chapters 1 through 7.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good
Um,
overarching question for the series.
a lot of these other prompts we've already spoken about, so I want you guys to bring up one that you feel like we haven't covered enough. And so I'll do mine first, and I want to talk about the poems before each chapter. And I know a lot of people skip these, but I think they're really beautiful poetry. And before this episode, we're going to put up Ashman reading the original, the one at the very beginning of the book, and especially that one I think tells the story of the entire Book of the Fallen in a way that will make sense. But each was there any poems that stood out to you, or were there any?
I'm
For
gonna
me,
be
honestly,
honest.
yeah, not so far. um, yeah.
I'm gonna be honest. I read the poems and sometimes like, oh, I think I understand, and then I forget about it. So I feel like the poems are probably more meaningful upon rereading,
Oh, that
upon
makes sense.
like maybe 2, 3, 5, 10 reread. I don't know. I'm not that into poetry in general, so
I'm
to
not either.
me, yeah, it's harder for me to appreciate what he's trying to convey with the poems.
I get you. Well, I want to give an example.
Oh,
Sorry. The chapter 1's poem is about a soldier and soldiers being sent off to war and coming back and being changed. And that's really a lot of what chapter 1 is about. And after reading chapter 1, if somebody's, if they're interested, I think they should go back and read the poems after they're finished, and they can make the connections. Sorry, yes, sir?
I was going to say, if you read the poem right after you read the chapter, supposedly each poem explains what's going to happen in the chapter. But I will also say that I appreciate it more when we get like a quotation from Gothoth's Folly, or a quotation from like a history book written by an imperial historian or something like that, with like political commentary on the events of the empire. It's a lot easier to parse that out and remember like the tone and the meaning of it than to like try to like figure out like, oh, what's the rhythm and meter of this poem and what is it saying and all of that for me. So I like the epigraphs better when they're not poems, even though I like the poems too.
Yeah, I'll say that a lot of these poems and epigraphs that come before the chapters different parts of them will come up later on. Like Gotha's Fall is one that comes up quite a bit. Or I
Okay.
think even in chapters 1 through 7, 2 of them were written by Phalesin, and it was called I forgot, it was something about Rise to Shadow or something like that.
Okay.
So does anyone else have a prompt they want to bring up or something else?
Yes. I like the prompt with the favorite lines. I went through the chapters just before doing this really quick and just found a few that I really like.
Okay.
And I'll share a few. Taking up the sword is the last act of desperate men. That is a very nice play on Isaac Asimov's quote from Foundation: "Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent." Another one that I thought really summed up was a good encapsulation of chapter 2. In some military headquarters back in the Empire's capital of Unta, 3,000 leagues distant, an anonymous aide would paint a red stroke across the Red Army on the active list, then write in fine script beside it: "Pale, late winter, the 1,163rd year of burned sleep." Thus would the death of 9,000 men and women be noted, and then forgotten. And then just last, Cribb's description of a coin: "An item that passes without provenance, pursued by many who thirst for its cold kiss, on which life and all that lay within life is often gambled. Alone, a beggar's crown, in great numbers, a king's folly. Weighted with ruin, yet blood washes from it beneath the lightest rain, and to the next no hint of its cost. It is as it is," says Cribb, "worthless, but for those who insist otherwise."
Wonderful. I'll share mine next. This is Krupp, and he's talking to himself in his dream, talking to many of himself. "All deceit is born in the mind, and there it is nurtured while virtues starve." Another one with Topper and Paran. Topper says, "Words are like coin, it pays to hoard." And Paran said, "Until you die on a bed of gold."
Yeah.
And finally, this one's not actually in the Book of the Fallen. This is in the forward. And Erickson says, "Ambition is not a dirty word. Piss on compromise. Go for the throat."
Love that one.
Yes, no, do you
yeah.
have any?
I don't, though I did highlight the one that Ashamon first read, intending to read it for just such a section. So, and we get to do it twice, because I'm pretty sure that quote almost word for word comes up again at least once in the series. So
Nice. The one about the sword.
I don't think that counts as a spoiler.
All right, well, that has been the first discussion of the first 7 chapters of Gardens of the Moon. Again, if you guys have any criticisms or helpful things, anything, really, we're welcome to come join us on the Discord. That's where we are. Don't bother with Reddit. We have a Twitter, which Panda handles, so check her out there too. So goodbye, everybody.
Thank you
Thanks,
for
guys.
listening.
Bye-bye.
Music is Galactic Damages by Jingle Punks.